A young German soldier stood on foreign soil in the summer of 1944 expecting death. What happened next would shatter everything he believed about his enemies and change the course of his entire existence. This is the hidden chapter of World War II. Werner Müller was 23 years old when American forces surrounded his company near Anzio in June 1944. He had been fighting in Italy for months. His unit had been cut off from supply lines. The rations they received barely sustained life. Thin soup and hard bread constituted their daily meals. His boots were falling apart, his uniform was threadbare. The German war machine that had once seemed invincible was crumbling around him. When the Americans closed in and his company commander gave the order to surrender, Muller expected the worst. Every German soldier had heard the stories. American troops executed prisoners. They tortured captured men for information. They worked prisoners to death in labor camps. His officers had warned them repeatedly that falling into American hands meant a fate worse than death on the battlefield. Better to die fighting than to surrender and face the horrors that awaited. The corporal approached without hostility. He offered Muller water. Fresh, clean water. Muller drank and waited for something terrible to happen. Nothing did. Within hours, the Americans provided food. Real food, substantial portions of meat and vegetables and bread. The quality exceeded anything Muller had received from his own army in the previous 8 months. A medic examined the shrapnel wound in his left leg. The medic cleaned and bandaged the wound with efficient professionalism. No cruelty, no threats, no violence. Muller spent the first night of his captivity confused beyond comprehension. A C-47 transport aircraft taxied toward them. The prisoners were being flown somewhere, but no one knew the destination. Muller boarded the aircraft alongside an older soldier named Ernst Becker. Becker had been shot through the left arm during the same engagement. He whispered theories about their fate. Coal mines. Road construction. Labor camps designed to work them until they collapsed. Muller listened but said nothing. The journey took them to Casablanca first. Then across the Atlantic Ocean to New York, then by train across the American heartland. Muller pressed his face against the train window and observed the landscape passing by. Farmland stretched to the horizon in every direction. Green fields. No evidence that this country was engaged in a global war. The contrast with Europe was staggering. Germany was being bombed daily. Italy had been reduced to rubble in many areas. Here, cows grazed peacefully in meadows that had never known the sound of artillery. At each stop, American soldiers brought food onto the train. Sandwiches made with thick slices of real meat. Fresh apples, hot coffee. Muller ate a sandwich containing 3 slices of ham, lettuce, and real butter. The German army had stopped issuing butter to frontline troops long ago. Becker finished his sandwich in 4 bites and stared at his apple as if it might vanish. Neither man could explain what was happening. This treatment contradicted everything they had been told. The train arrived at Fort Robinson, Nebraska in the middle of June. The camp looked like what Muller had expected from a prison facility. Wooden barracks surrounded by 12-foot fences topped with barbed wire. Guard towers at each corner equipped with searchlights and machine guns. American soldiers with weapons patrolling the perimeter. This was clearly a place of confinement. A place where prisoners would be held against their will. But the processing that followed defied all expectations. An American captain addressed the prisoners through an interpreter. He explained the camp regulations. Prisoners would work during daylight hours on farms or construction projects in the surrounding area. They would be paid 80 cents per day for their labor. They would receive an additional 10 cents daily for personal items. Their food rations would be identical to those provided to American soldiers. They could write letters to their families. They could receive mail in return. They would have access to recreational facilities, including sports equipment and a library. The interpreter translated each sentence while Muller listened with growing disbelief. This description sounded nothing like a death camp. This sounded like a work program with privileges attached. The barracks assigned to Muller contained 40 bunks arranged along both walls. Each bed had a mattress. Each bed had 2 blankets. Each bed had a pillow filled with actual feathers. Muller had slept on straw or bare ground for most of the previous year in Italy. He sat on his assigned bunk and pressed his hand against the mattress. The surface was thin but genuine. The pillow was soft against his neck. Becker took the bunk above him and predicted that this was temporary. The Americans would move them to the real camp once processing was complete. A prisoner at the far end of the barracks who had arrived the previous week laughed at this assessment. "Welcome to the Hilton Hotel," he called out. "The Americans treat us better than the Wehrmacht ever did." The morning routine began at 5 with a bugle call. Roll call followed immediately. The guards counted prisoners and directed them to the dining hall. The serving line offered scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter, and coffee. Real coffee made from actual coffee beans. The German army had been issuing ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns for years. Muller carried his tray to a table and sat with Becker and 2 other men from their barracks. They ate in silence for several minutes. Becker calculated the calorie content of their breakfast, 3,000 calories. Maybe more. Their daily rations in Italy had provided 1,800 calories on good days, sometimes less. This single breakfast exceeded what they had received for an entire day of combat duty. The work assignments began after breakfast. Muller joined a group of 20 prisoners assigned to agricultural labor on a nearby farm. An American farmer arrived at 8 in the morning driving a truck. The prisoners climbed into the back. No guards accompanied them. Just the farmer alone with 20 German prisoners who could theoretically overpower him and escape into the Nebraska grasslands. But escape to where? No forest to hide in, no mountains to climb. No borders to cross for hundreds of miles. The prisoners rode in the truck bed and watched the prairie grass wave in the wind. The farmer's name was Harold Peterson. He owned 600 acres of wheat and sugar beets. He spoke no German. The prisoners spoke no English. Peterson used hand gestures to demonstrate the work he wanted done, weeding between rows of sugar beets. Agricultural labor that was physically demanding, but not designed to cause harm. Peterson worked alongside the prisoners. He pulled weeds from the same rows they worked. He sweated under the same sun. He drank water from the same containers. At noon, Peterson stopped work and distributed lunch from a cooler in his truck. Sandwiches made with thick slices of ham, cheese, pickles, and mustard. Bottles of lemonade packed in ice. The farmer sat with the prisoners in the shade of his vehicle and ate his own sandwich. He pulled a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes from his pocket and offered them around. Several prisoners accepted. Peterson showed them photographs from his wallet, his wife Dorothy, his daughter Sarah, his 3 sons in American military uniforms. He pointed to one photograph of a young man and made a gesture suggesting flight. His son James was a pilot, probably flying bombers over Germany at this very moment, possibly bombing Cologne where Muller's mother and brother lived. Yet here sat Peterson sharing his lunch and cigarettes with German prisoners. Becker leaned close to Muller and whispered an explanation. This was propaganda. The Americans were demonstrating their prosperity and generosity to encourage German soldiers to surrender rather than fight. Showing prisoners how good they had it would spread through the ranks when letters reached Germany. Other soldiers would surrender faster, knowing they would be treated well. Muller considered this theory. It was plausible. The routine continued for weeks without variation. Wake at 5. Roll call. Breakfast. Work until 4. Dinner. Recreation. Sleep. Muller gained weight steadily. His leg wound healed completely under the care of American medics who changed his bandages and monitored for infection. He began receiving letters from Germany 6 weeks after his arrival. The correspondence took time to cross the ocean, but it arrived. His mother wrote about conditions in Cologne. Food was increasingly scarce. Rations had been reduced. Butter and meat were nearly impossible to obtain through legal channels. The bombing raids had intensified. His younger brother Eric wrote that their father had been conscripted into the Volkssturm, the people's militia formed to defend German cities against Allied advances. His family was struggling in Germany while he ate beef stew and apple pie in Nebraska. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. He had been a loyal soldier. He had not questioned the German cause openly. He had followed orders and fought where he was told to fight. His reward for surrender was a life better than anything he had experienced as a soldier in the Wehrmacht. Better than his family was experiencing as civilians in the Reich. The propaganda he had believed for years was dissolving in the face of daily evidence that contradicted every claim. The educational programs announced in September expanded his understanding even further. The University of Colorado offered extension courses by correspondence to interested prisoners. Muller enrolled in an English language course. Textbooks and workbooks arrived by mail within 2 weeks. All materials were provided free of charge. He studied in the evenings after returning from work on Peterson's farm. Other prisoners enrolled in mathematics, history, engineering, and various technical subjects. The barracks transformed into an informal classroom. Muller visited one afternoon and discovered a collection that stunned him. The shelves included works that had been banned in Germany under Nazi rule. He found All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. This novel had been prohibited since 1933 as defeatist literature. Copies had been burned in public ceremonies across Germany. Possession was punishable by imprisonment. Here in an American prison camp, Muller could check out the book and read it in his bunk without fear. The novel described German soldiers in the First World War experiencing horror and futility and waste. The book had been banned because it told uncomfortable truths about war. Muller read it over 3 evenings and felt something shift inside him. By October, Muller could converse in basic English with Peterson. They developed a hybrid communication system mixing German and English words with gestures and expressions. Peterson told Muller about his family in greater detail. His wife Dorothy taught Sunday school at their church. His daughter Sarah was studying to become a nurse. His 3 sons were scattered across the globe fighting in different theaters of the war. James flew B-24 bombers over Germany. The second son, Thomas, was with infantry in France. The youngest, Robert, served in the Navy in the Pacific. Muller struggled to process the implications. Peterson's eldest son was bombing Germany. Possibly bombing Cologne. Possibly killing people Muller knew. Yet Peterson treated Muller with kindness and respect that exceeded anything he had received from his own officers. Muller asked Peterson directly one afternoon how he could be kind to a German prisoner when his son was fighting Germans in Europe. Peterson thought for a long moment before responding slowly in simple English that Muller could understand. "You are not the war," Peterson said. "You are a man. My son fights soldiers, not you." The distinction was profound. Peterson separated the individual from the conflict. He saw Muller as a human being rather than as an extension of the Nazi war machine. This perspective was foreign to everything Muller had been taught about enemies and warfare and national conflict. In November, Peterson invited Muller and 2 other prisoners to his farmhouse for Thanksgiving dinner. The American guards approved the request. Dorothy Peterson met them at the door with a warm smile. The dining table was set with china plates and cloth napkins. Peterson said a prayer before the meal. Then they ate turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce, rolls with butter. The meal was enormous by any standard Muller had known. After the main course, Dorothy brought out apple pie and coffee. She asked Muller about his family in Germany. He explained as best he could that his mother and brother were in Cologne, that the city had been bombed heavily, that they were struggling but alive. Dorothy Peterson's expression changed. Sadness crossed her features. She reached across the table and touched Muller's hand. She spoke directly to him in slow, careful English. "I pray God protects her." An American woman whose son was bombing Germany offered to pray for a German soldier's mother. Muller felt tears forming behind his eyes and forced them back through sheer will. The moment defied every category he possessed for understanding human relationships during wartime. The Christmas celebration in December reinforced the patterns that had been established throughout the year. Prisoners decorated a tree in the recreation hall. They sang carols in German while American guards listened from their posts. The camp kitchen prepared a special meal. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, vegetables, dinner rolls, cake. The American camp commander visited the dining hall during the celebration and wished the prisoners well through an interpreter. He expressed hope that the war would end soon so everyone could return home to their families. Some prisoners wept during the celebration. Others sat in stunned silence contemplating the strange reality of their captivity. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. News reached the camp through radio broadcasts. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich had collapsed. Hitler was dead. Muller sat in the recreation hall with other prisoners listening to the announcement and felt relief rather than shame or anger. Relief that the killing had stopped. Relief that the bombs would stop falling on Cologne. Relief that his family might survive. Around him some prisoners wept. Others sat in silence. A few hardcore Nazis walked out in protest. Most simply absorbed the information and waited to learn what would happen next. The camp administration announced that repatriation would begin but would take time. Transportation was limited. German prisoners would be sent back gradually over months or possibly years. Muller continued working on Peterson's farm. The war was over, but the daily routine remained unchanged. In July 1945, Peterson made an offer that would alter the trajectory of Muller's entire existence. They were working together, repairing a fence on the property boundary. Peterson stopped working and turned to face Muller directly. He spoke slowly in simple English to ensure comprehension. "When you go back to Germany, it will be hard. The country is destroyed. No jobs, no food. If you want, you can come back here. I will sponsor you. You can work on my farm. Legal immigration. You can become American citizen." Muller stared at Peterson for a long moment. Peterson repeated the offer using different words to ensure understanding. He would help Muller immigrate to America legally after repatriation was complete. Muller could work on the farm for a real wage. He could build a life in Nebraska. The offer was genuine and serious. Muller did not answer immediately. About his brother Eric, about the ruins his country had become, about the uncertainty awaiting anyone who returned to occupied Germany. He thought about the life he had experienced in this camp, the dignity, the relative comfort, the absence of constant fear. He told Peterson he would consider the proposal carefully. Repatriation orders came for Muller in March 1946. Nearly a year had passed since the German surrender. He would be transported to New York and then shipped to Europe for processing and release. Peterson drove to the camp on Muller's last day to say goodbye. He brought a gift, a photograph of his family with Muller standing among them. The photograph had been taken at Thanksgiving dinner. Peterson wrote his address on the back of the photograph. Harold Peterson, Route 2, Crawford, Nebraska. He told Muller to write when he reached Germany. The offer still stood. Peterson clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You are a good man, Werner. Do not forget that." The journey back to Europe took 3 weeks. Muller landed in France and was transferred to a British processing center. Then he was released and sent to Germany by train. He arrived in Cologne in April 1946. Devastation exceeded anything he had imagined from his mother's carefully worded letters. Block after block of rubble. Buildings reduced to hollow shells. Streets barely passable through the debris. The cathedral stood intact. Almost everything else was destroyed. When he reached his family's street, he found their house still standing. Damaged but inhabitable, his mother was there. She had aged a decade in the 2 years since he had seen her last. Her hair was completely gray. Deep lines creased her face. She wept when she saw him. His brother Eric was not there. Eric had been killed in February 1945 fighting in Berlin against Soviet forces. He was 17 years old when he died. Their father had survived but was broken in both body and mind. He sat in a chair and stared at the wall. He rarely spoke. The man Muller remembered had been replaced by a ghost inhabiting a damaged body. Muller tried to rebuild his life in Cologne. He found work as a laborer clearing rubble from bombed buildings. The pay was minimal. Food was still rationed and inadequate. Muller experienced hunger most days. Deeper hunger than he had known in Italy before his capture. The irony was not lost on him. He had eaten better as an American prisoner than he now ate as a free man in his own country. He had gained weight in captivity and was losing it in liberation. He wrote to Peterson in June 1946. The letter took 2 months to reach Nebraska, but Peterson responded promptly. The offer still stood. Muller discussed the possibility with his mother one evening as they sat in their damaged house eating thin soup. She told him to go. "There is nothing left for you here, Werner. You have an opportunity to build a life somewhere else. Take it. Do not waste it on sentiment." Muller applied for immigration to the United States in October 1946. The process was slow and complicated by his status as a former enemy soldier. But Peterson's sponsorship helped. Peterson wrote letters to immigration officials. He provided documentation of Muller's work history on his farm. He guaranteed employment and housing. The American authorities reviewed the application over many months. They approved it in March 1948. Muller arrived in New York in May 1948. He took a train across the country to Nebraska. Peterson met him at the station in Crawford. The farmer looked older and grayer than Muller remembered. But he smiled broadly when he saw Muller step off the train. He shook Muller's hand firmly and welcomed him back. Muller worked on Peterson's farm for 6 years. He started as a hired laborer earning $150 per month, plus room and board. He saved money carefully. He learned American farming methods and American business practices. By 1952, he had saved $4,000. Peterson helped him purchase a small farm of his own. 160 acres of land adjacent to Peterson's property. Muller became a landowner in a country that had been his enemy less than a decade earlier. He met a woman named Margaret at a church social in 1953. She was the daughter of German immigrants who had come to America in the previous century. She spoke some German but considered herself entirely American. They married in 1954. Muller became an American citizen in 1955. He took the citizenship oath in a courthouse in Crawford with Peterson and Margaret in attendance as witnesses. The judge who administered the oath was a World War II veteran who had fought in France. He shook Muller's hand after the ceremony and welcomed him as a fellow American. Werner and Margaret had 3 children over the following years. The children grew up speaking English and attending American schools and playing American sports. They belonged to this country in a way Muller could never quite achieve himself. He remained grateful for America while carrying Germany inside him always. He never returned to Germany, though he corresponded with his mother until her death in 1967. He sent her money when he could afford to do so. She wrote that life in Germany was slowly improving. The economy was recovering, the rubble was being cleared. Buildings were rising where ruins had stood. But she never suggested that Muller should return. "You made the right choice," she wrote in her final letter. "I am proud of you." Harold Peterson died in 1972 at the age of 78. Muller spoke at his funeral. He stood before Peterson's family and friends and neighbors and tried to explain what the farmer had meant to him. "He treated me with dignity when he had no reason to," Muller said. "He saw me as a person rather than as an enemy. He gave me a chance to build a new life. I owe him everything." Werner Müller farmed his land until 1985 when he retired at 64. He lived quietly in Crawford. He attended church. He spent time with his grandchildren. He occasionally spoke to school groups about his experiences as a prisoner of war. He spoke openly about the shock of discovering that his enemies had treated him better than his own army had, about the lies he had been told and the truth he had discovered through direct experience. He was often asked if he felt guilty about leaving Germany. His answer remained consistent across the decades. "I feel grateful. I was given an opportunity that most men never receive. I was given a chance to start over, to build a new life in a country that valued hard work and treated people with dignity. I took that chance. I have no regrets." Werner Müller died in 2006 at the age of 85. His obituary in the local newspaper described him as a respected farmer, a devoted husband and father, and a valued member of the community. It mentioned his service in the German army and his time as a prisoner of war at Fort Robinson. It mentioned his decision to emigrate to America and his 58 years as a citizen. He was survived by his wife, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, all American citizens. All living lives that would have been impossible if an American farmer named Harold Peterson had not treated a German prisoner with unexpected kindness in 1944. The story of German prisoners of war in American camps during World War II remains relatively unknown to most people today. Over 370,000 German prisoners were held in camps across the United States between 1943 and 1946. They were paid for their labor, according to the Geneva Convention. They received the same food rations as American soldiers. They had access to education and recreation and medical care. Many gained weight during their captivity. An estimated 5,000 to 10,000 chose to immigrate to the United States after the war ended. The camps are gone now. Fort Robinson is a state park in Nebraska, where visitors hike trails and observe wildlife without knowing that prisoners once worked and lived on this land. But the legacy remains. It lives in the descendants of those prisoners. It lives in the lives built by men who chose to stay in America rather than return to a defeated Germany. Their story serves as a reminder that even in war human decency can persist. That sometimes the most profound transformations happen not on battlefields but in prison camps where prisoners discover they are being treated as human beings. The propaganda that German soldiers absorbed before their capture painted Americans as brutal sadists who tortured and executed prisoners. This propaganda served military purposes. It encouraged German troops to fight to the death rather than surrender. It reduced the number of prisoners American forces would need to feed and house and guard. But the propaganda was false. Muller was not unique in his experience. Thousands of German prisoners went through similar transformations. They arrived expecting death and discovered dignity instead. They expected starvation and received abundance. They expected cruelty and encountered kindness from American farmers. Like Harold Peterson, who saw them as men rather than as enemies to be hated and punished. The decision to treat prisoners humanely was not purely altruistic. American authorities understood that word would spread. Letters home describing good treatment would reach German soldiers still fighting. Some would surrender more readily knowing they would not be tortured or killed. The humane treatment served strategic purposes alongside moral ones. But the kindness of individual Americans like Peterson transcended strategy. Peterson invited prisoners into his home. He shared meals with them. He offered to sponsor their immigration after the war. These actions went far beyond what military strategy required. The transformation that prisoners underwent in American camps challenged their fundamental beliefs about the world. Muller had been raised in Nazi Germany. He had been taught that Americans were decadent and weak and cruel. The direct experience of American kindness forced him to question everything he had been told. The lies dissolved in the face of contrary evidence presented daily through the quality of food and the dignity of treatment and the humanity of interactions with his captors. Some prisoners resisted this transformation. Hardcore Nazis maintained their beliefs throughout captivity and returned to Germany still convinced of their cause. But many others underwent changes similar to Muller. They recognized that they had been lied to. They recognized that the enemy they had been taught to hate was treating them better than their own government had. This recognition was painful. It meant acknowledging that years of belief had been based on falsehood. It meant accepting that the cause they had fought for was not what they had been told. The camps where these transformations occurred have faded from memory. Few Americans today know that German prisoners once worked on farms across the heartland. Few know that enemy soldiers ate beef stew and apple pie while their families in Germany struggled with severe rationing. Few know that some of those prisoners stayed and became Americans themselves. The story has been largely forgotten, but forgetting serves no one. The story of how America treated its prisoners during World War II matters. It demonstrates that national character reveals itself in how the powerful treat the powerless. It demonstrates that kindness can flow across battle lines. It demonstrates that human connection is possible even between enemies sworn to destroy each other. These lessons retain their relevance across the decades. Harold Peterson died never knowing the full impact of his kindness. He treated a young German prisoner with basic human decency. He shared his lunch and his cigarettes. He invited him to Thanksgiving dinner. He offered to sponsor his immigration. These actions seemed small to Peterson. He was simply treating another human being as he would want to be treated himself. But the ripple effects extended across generations. Werner Müller built a life in America because of Peterson's kindness. 2 great-grandchildren existed by the time Muller died. All of them American citizens. All of them living in a country that their ancestor had once fought against. The numbers tell part of the story. But numbers cannot capture the individual transformations that occurred within those camps. They cannot capture the moment when Muller realized that the Americans were not going to execute him. They cannot capture the taste of butter after a year without it. They cannot capture the feeling of sleeping on a real mattress with a feather pillow. They cannot capture the profound confusion of being treated better by enemies than by allies. The story of Werner Müller is one story among thousands. Other farmers showed similar kindness. Other transformations occurred in other camps across the country. Each story is unique in its details but similar in its arc. Fear giving way to confusion. Confusion giving way to understanding. Understanding giving way to gratitude. These stories deserve remembering. They complicate simple narratives about war and enemies and national character. They show that individuals can transcend the conflicts their nations engage in. They show that kindness is always possible regardless of circumstances. They show that the way prisoners are treated reveals something essential about the societies that hold them. America during World War II was not perfect. Racism pervaded many aspects of society. Japanese Americans were interned in camps far worse than those housing German prisoners. The treatment of German POWs reflected racial biases of the era. White European prisoners received better treatment than Japanese prisoners received in some contexts. These complexities do not diminish the kindness shown to prisoners like Muller, but they place it in proper context. The Geneva Convention established minimum standards for prisoner treatment. America exceeded those standards in many ways. The educational programs, the recreational facilities, the payment for labor, the food quality, these exceeded what was legally required. They reflected a decision to treat prisoners with dignity beyond the minimum requirements of international law. That decision had consequences that extended far beyond the war. Prisoners who returned to Germany carried memories of their treatment. Some of those memories influenced individual decisions about careers and families and values. The kindness shown in American camps rippled outward through decades and generations. Werner Müller's great-grandchildren know the story of their ancestor. They know that he fought for Germany and surrendered to Americans and was treated with dignity in captivity. They know that a farmer named Harold Peterson invited him to Thanksgiving dinner and offered to sponsor his immigration. They know that their existence traces back to kindness shown during a brutal war. The camps are gone, but the stories remain. Fort Robinson is a state park now. Families visit to hike and camp and observe wildlife. Few know that prisoners once lived and worked on this land. Few know that transformations occurred here that shaped lives across generations. The physical structures have been demolished or repurposed. Only the stories preserve what happened. Stories like this one matter because they preserve what might otherwise be lost. They connect present generations to past events. Harold Peterson made a choice to treat Werner Müller with kindness. That choice created ripples that continue spreading today. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to this channel. These are stories that conventional history books often overlook. Stories about individuals whose choices shaped the lives of people they would never meet. Stories about kindness during wartime and transformation in captivity and new beginnings in unexpected places. We bring these stories forward because they matter. They remind us of what human beings are capable of, even during the darkest periods of history. They remind us that enemies can become friends. They remind us that kindness can bridge any divide. Subscribe now and join us in keeping these memories alive for future generations.